Joan of Arc, the Hundred Years' War and her trial. A long time ago, between 1337 and 1453, the most important war of medieval Europe took place. This war was called the Hundred Years' War, although in reality it lasted 116 years. At that time, England and France were enemies because they fought for the crown of France and, as a consequence, for who governed the kingdom. The problem began when Charles IV of the Capetian dynasty died without leaving a male heir, that is, a son who would continue on the throne. Then it was necessary to look for the closest male relative of Charles. He had two brothers who had already died and a sister called Isabella, who was married to the King of England, Edward II. Both had a son, Edward III. Thus, Edward III remained as possible heir of the French crown, but he also carried English royal blood from the Plantagenet dynasty. Of course, this created a problem because the French nobility did not want the future King of England to also keep the crown of France. Then the nobles decided to choose another branch of the Capetians, and from the House of Valois, the cousins of the Capetians, they chose Philip VI. They justified this decision by appealing to the Salic law, which established that no woman could inherit the throne or transmit royal blood. In this way, Philip VI was defined as King of France, and finally Edward III remained King of England. The problem was that Edward inherited lands in the form of colonies in France. So in his country he was king, but when he traveled to his French colonies, he became vassal of the King of France. With time, this situation generated resentment. Philip VI, in his eagerness to unify his kingdom, which until then was formed by different semi-autonomous fiefs, took Edward's colonies. In 1337, Edward declared war to recover his lands and at the same time to claim what he believed always belonged to him, the crown of France. From that moment, the war began. There were bloody great battles followed by short periods of peace, and then the war started again. In this way, the map of France was transformed. By the year 1429, there was more territory in the hands of the English and their allies than under French control. The crown of France remained in the same uncertain situation. Already 4 kings had passed. Philip VI, the one we already mentioned, John II the Good, Charles V, and Charles VI. On the English side, also 3 kings had passed, Edward III, Henry IV, and Henry V. Meanwhile, the Black Death devastated Europe. Around 40% of the population died. Illness and misery devastated the villages, and still the war continued in French territory. France was in ruins. Besides, the French nobles fought among themselves, and England took advantage of this situation to seize more territory. History seemed to repeat itself. Charles VI, called the Mad, King of France in 1422, before dying signed a truce with England, which implied marrying his daughter Catherine to the English King Henry V, and he declared to leave his crown to the son of both, without recognizing his own son as the Dauphin Charles, the future King of England. When Charles VI died, the succession of the French crown was once again in dispute. On one side in French territory remained Charles VII, the Dauphin, only 18 years old with the support of several nobles, but he needed to be crowned in the Cathedral of Reims to be recognized as a legitimate king. On the other side there was Henry VI, an infant of only 1 year, with right to the crown by the Treaty of Troyes. Everything seemed lost for France. There was no escape, and destiny seemed to be to accept the English as new kings. But in the middle of this darkness, a young lady was about to shine, Joan of Arc. She was only a 17-year-old peasant who lived in a small village called Domremy. She did not know how to read or write, but her mother gave her a deeply Christian education. One day in her garden, she had a vision that changed her life. In the middle of a shining light, Saint Catherine, Saint Margaret, and Archangel Michael appeared to her, and they entrusted her with a divine mission from God, to save France from the English and to crown Charles VII as King of France. At first, nobody believed her, but her faith and bravery convinced soldiers and generals. Dressed in armor, she was escorted to Chinon, where she met the young Dauphin. In 1429, the Dauphin gave Joan a new armor, a horse, a sword, and a banner, and sent her with a small group of men to liberate Orléans, besieged by English and Burgundians, enemies of France. This transformed a political and territorial war of years into a religious enterprise that lifted the morale of soldiers and of the French people, who gained new airs of empowerment, and they dared to fight following Joan's banner. This changed everything. Joan liberated Orléans, kept winning battles, and opened the way to Reims, where Charles was finally crowned Charles VII, King of France, only 2 months after the liberation of Orléans. Once Charles was king and recovered part of the French territory, he started negotiations and made a truce with England. But Joan did not agree and continued fighting. However, in the Battle of Compiègne, she was captured by the Burgundians and sold to the English for £10,000. They took her to the city of Rouen, under English control, where a tribunal of pro-English clerics judged her unfairly. They accused her of heresy, of false testimony, of using God's name in vain, of lying about her visions. Against all these accusations, she defended herself with firmness. But she was condemned for dressing like a man, for dressing like what she really was, a warrior. Charles tried to rescue her several times, but he failed. Finally, Joan was sentenced to die at the stake. In 1431, at 19 years old, she was burned alive in Rouen. Her remains were burned a second time so that nothing remained as relic, and her ashes were thrown into the Seine River. After Joan's death, the war continued for 22 more years. In 1435, France signed the Treaty of Arras with the Burgundians, and England lost its strongest allies on French soil. France reorganized its army, made it stronger and professional, and introduced modern artillery like cannons. Step by step, it recovered cities and territories. In 1453, France fought the last battle against England, the Battle of Castillon, thus closing 116 years of conflict. As a consequence, the territory of France was unified under the Valois crown, the feudal division came to an end, England renounced its claim to the royal crown of France, and France kept the maritime routes, which later it used for trade. As for Joan of Arc, with time the Catholic Church canonized her as a saint. Today she is a universal symbol of bravery, faith, and freedom.